Welcome to Treadmill Talks with Shannon Maves, a podcast for athletes and fitness enthusiasts to pass the time during mind-numbing cardio while I use my no-bullshit coaching style to educate, inspire, and entertain. I'm your host, Shannon Maves. Now let's walk and talk. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Treadmill Talks. Today's episode is the one with Elena Colombe. I first met Elena backstage at an OCB competition back in 2019 when we were competing on the same team. Back then, she was working as a public educator, but has since left her career as a teacher to now become a full-time online fitness coach who specializes in hormones and metabolism, coaching individuals using a holistic approach to fitness, nutrition, and hormones. As a certified hormone specialist, personal trainer, and functional nutritionist, she meets individuals where they are at now to overcome the imbalances brought on by chronic dieting, autoimmune disease, and chronic illness by giving her clients tailored support to help them optimize their nutrition, movement, and lifestyle habits so they can thrive in today's busy world without wondering if they'll have to squeeze into a pair of Spanx in order to wear that little black dress or gain 10 pounds on vacation just because they ate foods that they don't normally eat. She is also a Hashimoto's and endometriosis warrior herself and an absolute wealth of knowledge in her field, which is why I cannot wait to pick her brain today and discuss how competition prep can affect things like hormones and metabolism. So let's get into it. Elena, how are you doing today? Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's been, it's morning for me still. It's weird now. You're a whole 3 hours ahead of me.
I know. It's been an adjustment for sure.
You're no longer in Arizona.
So I know.
I'm like, man, it's already afternoon for you, but it's 10 a.m. for me. So
yeah, you're just starting and I've already had half of a day.
I know, it's just so weird to think about, but it's been so fun. Like just to you guys, I met Shannon, like she said, like years ago, back when I was just a baby bodybuilder, thinking that I was gonna be a big shot, and realized very quickly that that was not going to be the lifestyle for me. But there was still a lot of room within the fitness industry to help people that feel like ass. Oh, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah. Oh, fuck yeah.
Okay.
Say everything.
I figured, but like just
it's me, girl.
Yeah. I just to help people that feel like ass not feel like ass, because I definitely had my own sort of downturn with my chronic health, specifically after competing, due to just, I think, a lack of industry awareness at the time. Would you say that's probably an accurate statement?
Yeah.
It's like
I think so many people that go into bodybuilding are very unaware of what they're getting themselves into. So you're definitely not alone in that.
Yeah, for sure. And at the time, like functional nutrition, quote unquote, functional nutrition was not like a thing. It was more so like holistic, and like it was kind of referred to as this sort of like ambiguous thought of like, what are hormones? How does this actually work? And then we started getting people like Bill Campbell, Paul Ravella, like that started digging deeper into like the bigger nuances of like physiological adaptations on like a hormone level of how these things happen, right? So when we try to think about like metabolism, hormones and metabolism go hand in hand. Your hormones drive your metabolism. Like,
yeah.
As well as lifestyle choice, right? We know that, but hormones and metabolism very much go hand in hand. And there's a lot that I think that we just didn't know as an industry, even 5 years ago, 7 years ago, that we know now, which is so amazing. And so really what today is to kind of just give everybody sort of an education and maybe sort of what I wish I knew when I started competing, so that I could have headed off maybe some of the years of recovery that I personally had to go through after all of that. And it wasn't all due to competing. Like, I'm going to just be real with you guys. A lot of it was due to the fact that I was a teacher and drinking 32 ounces of coffee a day and teaching 13-hour days, for 3/4 of the school year. And then also trying to keep up a social life. And I was at the time in my early 20s. So like, it was fine, but like, we cannot live that way anymore now in our 30s. It just it doesn't hit the same. And I wouldn't want to. Like, I like not feeling like I'm strung out on caffeine 24/7 just to function.
For sure.
And so I think that the biggest thing that we have to talk about is sort of first of all, what is the like hierarchy of hormones? How do all these systems sort of work together? Because once we start to understand that, it starts to make a lot more sense as to how our body is extremely smart and will protect you at all costs from chronic external stressors, including yourself.
We have to listen to that, though, is the
You don't
key.
listen to that though, which is why like just understanding what those initial sort of like red flags are and how to pull back, because it is absolutely possible to pursue bodybuilding in a way that's healthy. But I will say the caveat in that is that, Shannon, and you can attest to this, I think personally, is that it requires a lot longer of a roadmap and timeline and commitment to longevity in the sport to get where you actually want to go, to do it in a way that doesn't leave you completely fucked up.
100%. So much longer than anybody thinks or wants to believe.
Yeah. And I mean, I can speak to that too, because like I've seen Shannon's progress, like, oh my God, she's like a completely different competitor than she was when I first met her. And that is not due to any sort of accident at all.
Yeah.
It's years of her putting in the reps and the
Being
commitment,
intentional.
showing up and being very intentional with her off seasons and intentional about her competitions and intentional about the timelines. Like she's really a great example of like how you have to play the long game in really anything when it comes to physique, sports, and even just like a lifestyle goal. So like you set a great example, which is why I've always admired you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
But anyway, so as I digress a little bit, I love to go off on tangents.
Same.
The three main systems that like a lot of people start to struggle with when they're competing, and I think that most women who have gone through some kind of competition at some point, especially those who've been on hormonal birth control, which is a lot of them, we all struggle with sort of three main things, which is our adrenals, so your cortisol, your thyroid, and then your sex hormones. To varying capacities and for various reasons, but again, the nuance of which is not sort of the main topic today, but more so like how this all works together. So before we get into the specifics of competing, let's talk about sort of the what I call the hormone hierarchy. And this is what I teach to my clients, and this is also what I teach to the coaches that I mentor, is that there's a hierarchy to how our body adapts and how things work in sort of a down-regulated system. So it always starts with, to be quite honest, gut health. Like if your digestive health is off, you're probably going to be having issues in areas alternatively.
Which is a whole topic I wanted to
whole
talk to you about,
topic
but I feel like we could do a whole episode on
That's a
just
whole
that.
other episode, I feel like one day. So, but just to know, if you're having chronic gut health issues, you may or may not be having, you've got bigger fish to fry, but keep listening. You'll need to kind of tackle both at the same time. But again, another conversation for another day. Then it starts with the adrenals. And people don't always think to look at the adrenals first, which is going to be your cortisol, your DHES, and your reverse T3 really together. And the adrenals sort of like downregulate in a few different phases. And the reason why the adrenals are sort of the starting line is because that is your body's stress response system. It is the system that will adapt to compensate without you even realizing that it's doing it. And the compensations in lab work look different unless you know what to look for. Like it might not look like a big deal unless you know what you're looking for lab trends, to be quite honest.
What should you be looking for? Or is that something you could even answer?
Yeah, I can. I'll do a little bit. Now, again, this is not always black and white. These are definitely generalizations, but when we talk about adrenal adaptations and serum lab correlations, and actually I have a handout that I'm going to refer that I made for the coaches that I work with, because this is a topic that I teach on. There's multiple ways to categorize adrenal adaptations. The way that I find it the easiest for people to recognize, and that offers sort of the most like flexibility when we're looking at trends, is sort of a 3-stage alarm response. Now, some people will say there's 4 stages. Some people will say there's 7. Again, different camps have different things. This is just what I have found the most digestible for most people, is that alarm phase, which is sort of the acute stress response, right? That you experience. This is sort of that first step to adaptations, where your serum cortisol is elevated, maybe for more hours in the day than it needs to be. and your DHES is maybe normal and maybe slightly elevated as the body initially responds to stress. And your reverse T3. Now, people think that reverse T3 is just a thyroid hormone, but it is also specific to stress. So a lot of times we'll see a production of cortisol to cope with the stressor, and this increase in cortisol can increase the conversion of T4 to reverse T3 instead of free T3, which is dumb. So that's how that happens. So sometimes you'll see like your TSH, your T4, your T3 is fine, but your reverse T3 is like a 22, which is extremely high. And so that is what people would say is like a normal lab, quote unquote, a normal thyroid lab. But unless we're looking at the reverse T3, that can tell us, hey, the body is experiencing some kind of chronic stress. I see all the time good TSH, good free T4, good free T3, borderline high cortisol, but like the reverse T3 is like a 22 or a 24 or something stupid like that versus like a 12 or a 15 or even like an 11.
Okay. And that kind of, I feel like that's kind of already getting into how they're connected too.
Exactly. This is
Yeah.
how they're connected. But this starts with the cortisol is chronically elevated because of either poor stress management or too many external stressors on the body, or both. Then we go into this resistance phase, which is sort of the actual now adaptations are starting to occur. So the stressors persist. Okay. The horrors persist. So do you. The body is now trying to produce cortisol at a higher level than normal. And this is when your cortisol now inches from like the 18 to 19 range into like the low 20s to mid 20s. Like I've seen cortisol serum as high as like a 24 first thing in the morning, which is extremely high. For reference, it should be between like a 14 and a 16.
Okay. And so those people that are waking up at a 24, they're the people that are adapting to that high level. And so they're just waking up like that every day.
And that's when you start to feel really groggy, a lot of brain fog during the day. And then this is where your DHEAS, which is necessary for creating sex hormones, starts to decline. And your reverse T3 can start to contribute. Now it's been high. It maybe is continuing to be high. It's now starting to slow down your metabolism because your thyroid drives your metabolism. Okay. Your thyroid dictates your metabolic rate on a hormonal level, which is why, like, this is why we don't love the calculators for calorie intake, because half the people who are going to use a calorie intake probably have a poor functioning thyroid for some reason or whatever, and the calories are completely off anyway. And the body kind of maintains now in this state of energy conservation because your body is like, nope, 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 nope. We must protect. And DHEAS levels start to decline, which can start to reduce the amount of circulating like testosterone and progesterone within the body, because the body is like, you are stressed. You do not get to procreate.
Yeah. This is not the time. We have other shit to prioritize.
Exactly. Yeah. We have other things to prioritize, and it is because you are stressed to the max. Then we get to this exhaustion phase, which is where we hit sort of adrenal insufficiency, or burnout, right? And this is where the adrenal glands have now been going at such a high rate that they just kind of, they stop producing an adequate amount of cortisol. And if we look at like a cortisol curve, it's meant to have like a spike in the morning and then slowly kind of taper off through the afternoon and be lower at night. Well, then I see people that have just a flat line all day long and they feel just exhausted all the time. They likely are at this point, they've maybe put on like a extra 7 to 10 pounds seemingly out of nowhere. They have a puffy chin, puffy face, lots of water retention. And maybe their PMS for females starts to get worse. Nobody has a sex drive at this point. Like it's just not happen. There's not enough sex hormones in your body circulating to have a sex drive.
It's so sad to think that there are so many people out there living like this, which is why I'm so happy to have you on here.
We think it's normal. And so now not only is your DHES kind of tanked, your cortisol is tanked, and your reverse T3 is like up there. And this is now when and really it's between this sort of like adaptation and exhaustion, where we start to see the actual changes within thyroid levels. Normally, I would say this is just based on trends of the hundreds of labs that I've reviewed over the last couple of years.
There's always extenuating circumstances.
There's always outliers,
yeah.
but most people are not special snowflakes, and this is typically the route that I see it goes. And so that's why we talk about the hierarchy. Cortisol is the first thing, but it's usually not the first thing that flags. By the time something gets flagged in lab work, you've had the cortisol issue for a while, and then somebody will hone in on like your thyroid, because that's like the doctor's first go-to is you have a slow thyroid. Now, what ends up happening is in these adrenal adaptations, that's when we start to see issues also with insulin management, blood sugar management, your glucose, which will impact your body's ability to store energy and manage calories, aka excess weight gain, due to poor blood sugar management and insulin response. This is when we can also see elevated cholesterol. I see high LDLs due to adrenal issues more frequently than I'd like to admit. And it's really not until the adrenals get taken care of that we start to see the body sort of reduce that stress. And then we start to see cholesterol levels level out, and like HDL come up and LDL go down. And then with thyroid, what ends up happening with the thyroid is your TSH starts to creep up, your free T3 starts to decrease a little bit, which is the active thyroid hormone. And then with your sex hormones, we start to see less and less and less of specifically progesterone and testosterone. Estradiol will typically be okay unless you're also on hormonal birth control. And then even then for female, your estradiol is probably going to be pretty low. And then you have what's called relative estrogen dominance, which is what most people struggle with if they're dealing with estrogen dominance, because at this point, all your sex hormones are just like low, low, low. And then your vitamin D is also low, which then impacts thyroid function.
So they are all connected. And this is why, so as competitors, a lot of this stuff is exacerbated even more so because competition prep is very rigorous. You are putting not just your body, but also your mind through a ton of stress, which is going to increase all of those adrenals, which is going to cascade into all of these other effects. Some people it's going to be more extreme than others. You know what I mean? Some people manage prep very well and can compete like year after year, show after show, a lot more easily than other people. There's people like me where I know my body and I know I need long off seasons. I need long times to recover because my body does start to fight me and I want to have longevity in the sport. So that's why I definitely want to kind of talk about if you want to, why does cortisol and adrenals and stuff, why do they get so high during competition prep? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a stress response. So we have to think about what are stressors on the body. Exercise is a stressor on the body, and it can be a good stressor. For lifestyle, exercise is a positive stressor, and it actually creates better efficiency with managing cortisol because your cortisol will spike for an emotional stressor as well. You open your email inbox, that feeling you get before you open your email first thing in the morning, or you see somebody's name pop up on your phone and that initial acute stress response, or you get a piece of bad news, you have an acute stress response. Exercise helps your body help that acute cortisol spike downregulate faster so you don't end up with chronically high cortisol. So this is why regular exercise is really, really healthy. Competitors are not doing what's considered normally lifestyle regular exercise. You're doing
it's excessive.
Twice as much. You're lifting maybe an extra 2 days a week. You're also getting in probably twice as many steps as what other people are going to have to get in. And then you added the cardio that continues to add more and more and more. And this is why when a lot of preps, when you get deep into prep, you have to add more and more and more and more because your body is adapting.
And then diet too, you have to cut more and more and more and more, which is also stressful on the body when you're not getting enough carbs for your brain to function.
Exactly. And that's another stressor on the body is a calorie deficit. For some people, a calorie deficit can be a good stressor, AKA if you have insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, you likely need a low carb diet for a stretch of time. And that's a positive stressor on the body. But for somebody who's in prep, that chronic calorie deficit is a stressor. Now, the thing is that again, the body is smart, it will adapt. But this is why for a lot of people, if you also have a lot of external stressors, your job is stressful, you have a lot of stress at home with family, maybe if you have a family member that's sick, maybe you don't get along with your spouse that much, maybe your kids are all over you all day long and you never get a peace and quiet to yourself, and the gym is your peace and quiet, but you're also continuing to push your body while you're also having all these external stressors. Maybe you have financial stressors, maybe you have just whatever else is going on in your life. It adds up, and that's why for some people they maybe manage prep a little bit better for whatever reason, but a lot of the people that don't manage prep well either have like an underlying autoimmune condition.
Yeah, which I want to get into that for sure.
It's another conversation, but
Yeah.
or they have a lot of external stressors that they are not really great at managing. Maybe they don't, not everybody has, not everybody goes home and feels peace with the people that they
Yeah.
live with. I would say the majority of people don't, to be quite
Yeah.
honest. And being at home is more of a stressor than being out of the house.
Or they
So,
go from the
right,
gym to a job that stresses them out, and then to a home,
correct.
and all home that stresses them out, like multiple things. Yeah.
Yes. And this is also too, like we talk about water retention. A
Hmm.
lot of people who experience either chronically high cortisol or chronically low cortisol have a lot of water retention. Now, if you have
Yeah.
chronically low cortisol, my guess is you're not show ready.
Yeah.
So there's no way that that would happen, I don't
Which
think.
I was going to ask about that with the water retention and things. I wanted to talk about, specifically competition prep, but also like peak week and show day,
Yeah.
like how that can affect it. And also if you have any tips, I mean, I want to talk at the end on like,
Yeah.
tips to management, all this stuff, but cortisol specifically and that water retention, any tips to manage it or like explain why it happens?
Yeah. So from a coaching perspective, and this is something that I'm sure that you've seen, what happens when you give somebody an extra rest day, tell them to get 8 or 9 hours of sleep, and you feed them a little bit?
They get a great sleep, they have a great shit, they weigh less, they're not holding water.
And there you go. That's the
Yeah.
answer. You've addressed the stressors. You've fed
Hmm.
them, you've rested them, and they had a bowel movement, which is
Yeah.
really important because
Hmm.
bowel movements is one of the main ways we clear out excess hormones within the body. So, like, if you're not pooping, you're storing a bunch of excess estrogen in your body, and that's not good. That
Yeah.
also causes issues specifically with midsection weight gain. I see estrogen
Hmm.
dominant fat storage patterns is that midsection weight gain, which is not great for competitors. So, like,
Hmm.
having regular bowel movements is really huge. And this happens mainly due to just the calorie deficit, not so much the adrenals, but a great way to keep the bowels really flexible and moving. And I do this a lot with my clients that come to me with like chronic constipation is doing bowel training. So getting a squatty potty
Yes.
and just sitting on the little squatty potty when you wake up for like 10 minutes. I just watch a little YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Don't like push, just like
Like
have your,
even if you don't have to go, just to
even
like
if you don't have
get
to
into
go.
that routine. Oh, I love that
Yeah.
idea.
So what it does is it trains like that function of the bowel and it actually keeps the bowel flexible. So if you look it up, it's actually called like flexible bowel training. And you can do this too, even like 30 to 45 minutes after like lunch or dinner. And you might
Yeah.
not poop right then, but like give it like an hour and you'll go.
I love that. I've never heard of that. I love I have a squatty potty. I love it. I tell everybody to get one, but I've never
Yeah.
heard of like actually just like every day doing that. That's
Yeah.
genius.
I
Makes
love
total sense.
that's my first go-to for somebody that's not shitting on a regular basis. It's not
Yeah.
a magnesium supplement, it's not a stool softener.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just want you to sit on a squatty potty a couple times a day for like 10 minutes a piece.
I
Let's
love that.
just start getting the function, because what happens when we start to use things like laxatives or smooth move tea is our body can become reliant on those because
Hmm.
it's not actually training the muscles,
Yeah.
just loosening the stool, which is
That's
two different
yeah.
functions.
That's always like last resort stuff that like
Yeah.
I've done sometimes during peak week, but then it's like you don't want to do that in peak week because then sometimes it can be like too much and it's like just adding in more variables that you don't need to add in.
Right, exactly. So, and that's what I recommend. So, like, if you're talking about like, we talk about watching somebody for like water retention or like
Mhm.
poor sleep or whatever it is, and from a coaching perspective too, and this is something I know but even for this, anybody else that's listening out there that's a coach or even a competitor, if you're not monitoring sleep and sleep quality, like if you're not monitoring how frequent you're having bowel movements, and if you're pushing low calories without any kind of structured refeed. I don't care if you didn't have a low weigh-in. You
Yeah.
still need probably a few more refeeds in there than what most people are willing to do, because all they want to do is see the next low weigh-in on the scale.
Mhm.
But I guarantee you, you'll feel a lot better. And you'll also have like better, just better like bowel clearance too. And another thing too, and this is not what people want to hear when they're already deep into a calorie deficit, but doing a larger bolus of food versus several small meals. So doing fewer larger meals,
Mhm.
that larger bolus of food will help move food through the digestive tract more effectively than like a bunch of tiny meals, which is another thing
Yeah.
that contributes to digestive issues during prep or
Yeah.
calorie deficit in general. So that's specifically on adrenals. So it's just like mainly just managing stress with
Yeah.
adrenals, managing sleep, and like really watching people for that, like, ooh, your face is looking a little puffy. You'll see it in their chin and in their jaw
Mhm.
and their cheeks. They'll start to kind of look a little bit just like soft in the face, even with prep face, right?
Yeah.
We know what prep face is when you just have like
And
we're
that's water retention from the adrenals, correct?
from, yeah,
Like,
that's from the
yeah.
stress response. So
Yeah.
just if you, even if you like, I almost think it's sometimes advisable, pull a couple days of rest, feed up a little bit,
Mhm.
see if you can get like a solid 8 to 9 hours of sleep, like 2 or 3 nights a week, and like you probably see more progress than that,
Yeah. For sure.
like just from
No.
a physiological standpoint.
Rest is such a key piece of the puzzle. And I coaching competitors, I have a lot of people that have that mindset of more, 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 more. And I
Right.
have to tell them, like, pump the brakes. You need to take a rest day. Like, I always tell all of my competitors and lifestyle clients, I say, they are all required to take a minimum of one full rest day every single week from training, from cardio and resistance training, one full rest day. And I have so many of them that fight me on it. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, it's a key piece to the puzzle. You need to chill the
Yeah.
fuck out at least once a week.
Yeah, and that's because you can create like a deficit basically
Mhm.
of recovery and sleep,
Mhm.
right? So sleep debt is a big issue. It can take from one poor night of sleep 2 or 3 solid nights of sleep to recover from one poor night of sleep.
Yeah, I
Even
believe
if
it.
you got the quantity the next night, you won't fully be recovered until the night after, maybe, or even the night after, just depending
Yeah.
on the
Because
person.
sleep is the time when a lot of your hormones, like I say, they essentially reset. It's like the time that they're like regulating themselves a lot. So
Yeah, you need that rest in order to recover. And a lot of it is also similar just with training output too.
mhm.
And a lot of that also has to do with injury prevention.
Yeah.
Like if you're not taking a full day off for a competitor or a high level lifestyle athlete, that is very like, you need to take a full day off. Like,
Mhm.
because your connective tissues don't last, the exercise makes them stronger, yes, but they still can only take so much. And especially as you advance as an athlete, like Shannon will probably agree with me, but like the amount of effort you have to put in the longer you train, as your training age increases, the amount of effort that you have to put in to continue to see gains, like muscle tissue added, is so disrespectfully hard,
Mhm.
so disrespectfully hard, that if you just push and push and push and push yourself with these, with more intensity, more weight, whatever the training strategy is, whether it's myo reps or tempo or rest pause or whatever you're doing that adds more time under tension to grow the tissue, you have to give it the time to rest. The
Mhm.
harder you play, the harder you have to rest,
Yeah.
basically. That's
Exactly.
how it
Because
goes.
you're increasing your likelihood of injuries, burnout, and you're slowing your progress. Like, there's so many reasons for it. And
Yeah.
having, I'm an expert in injury rehabilitation as well. So I have a lot of people that come to me with injuries, and bodybuilding. It's a lot of overuse. It's a lot of people that are like,
Yes.
I have to train 7 days a week. And, then they end up having to have surgery because of it.
Correct. So that's the adrenals and the recovery process, and high elevated cortisol can put you at risk of further injury, like
Mhm.
because your body is not, cortisol is the body's ability to manage inflammation, right? If it's chronically elevated, that's not good, but really where you see the bigger risk is when it starts to continue to downregulate. and the body no longer can manage inflammation, which is why we get the water retention and the puffiness. Guess what? That translates to acute injury as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it does. I don't know what to tell you. I don't make the rules.
Yeah. I know, right?
I don't make.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
It's
cortisol. Right?
Yeah. I want to talk. So that was fantastic. And I feel like I could honestly continue on just cortisol, but I do want to talk about thyroid and sex hormones and stuff, because
Yes.
I think you talked about like thyroid is next on that hierarchy. And that is
Yeah.
something that I think that's when a lot of competitors realize like, oh shit, something's thyroid is usually that first like flagged. And you know, sex hormones, a lot of women will, you know, develop amenorrhea and things like that too. But I think a lot of times it is that thyroid first.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get into that.
And exactly. And kind of just like the basic connection between thyroid and sex hormones too is that hypothyroidism or poor levels of like enough active thyroid hormone within the body can impact progesterone levels, which is even why when I have in like clients that are trying to conceive, I always look at their thyroid. Because if their thyroid is off and their progesterone is also off, I'm not going to tackle progesterone. I'm going to look at their thyroid to help bring that up. But anyway, that's just like a random nugget. So if you have a low thyroid, your PMS is probably through the roof too. So good times had by all. So the thyroid is basically the metabolic sort of powerhouse of the body. And this is one of the reasons why it also adapts, is because if you stop feeding your metabolism, what does it start doing? It starts slowing down, right? I posted this on my stories today, actually, and it's an analogy that I use quite frequently. The most basic way to explain it is your metabolism is like a fire. If you fuel it properly, it will burn hotter and faster and put you in a place where you can effectively lose body fat and add lean tissue. But if you are starving it or continuing to pull fuel from the fire, it will start to dwindle into embers. And that's really what happens with thyroid function. And so this is why
that analogy
it regulates during prep. Like that's the most basic way to explain it to people. And then they're like, oh, so like, for example, if I have a client and I deal with people under eating more than I deal with people overeating, to be quite honest. And they're wondering why they can't lose weight. And I'm like, you're not eating enough to promote fat loss.
Yeah.
And then I tell them the fire analogy and they're like, huh? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah,
like,
I absolutely love that analogy. That's fantastic. I'm such a visual person, so I love that, like picturing that fire like getting bigger and
exactly.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is your thyroid slows down. It slows down that metabolic rate, right? By reducing conversion of T4 to T3. So we have, this is going to blow everybody's mind who's ever had a thyroid lab from their doctor. There are 6 different thyroid hormones to check. Not 2, not 3. TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone, tells the brain to make T4. Your T4 has your total and then the free. The free T4, and this is the inactive, T4 doesn't do anything. It has to convert. So the free T4 has to convert to T3, but the body preserves energy by, instead of converting properly to T3, it will start to funnel into reverse T3, which does jack shit. So your body has less of the active thyroid hormone, free T3, keeping it running. That's what makes your metabolism go brrr, right? That's what makes your body run. And so that's how that.
Was that your engine noise? Brr.
That was my engine noise.
Okay, I love that.
That was great. So if we're not converting because the body's like, oh, we don't have enough gas in the tank, slow it down, conserve energy, it alters that conversion. And then what happens, that's like the first adaptation of subclinical hypothyroidism. So many people have subclinical hypothyroidism and they get put on medication for it, which is dumb because the medication is a T4 medication. But I'm like, why is giving somebody a T4 medication going to help them better convert T4 to T3? Like, it doesn't track. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation for another day again. But so, and then what ends up happening is your TSH starts to get higher and higher and higher because your thyroid's trying to now compensate. And it thinks that by increasing TSH, it's going to give you a better shot at getting just a little bit more free T3. but that usually doesn't happen. So it's funny because the elevated TSH actually means your thyroid is likely underproducing and under converting from T3 to T4, having to work harder. It has to work harder to get less juice.
Yeah.
And so that's why it continues to increase and increase and increase. So that elevated TSH is slightly problematic. And so things that we can do for thyroid function, because it's a very easy fix. Okay. Brazil nut, eat 1 Brazil nut a day for like 90 micrograms of selenium, I think it is.
Okay, I was going to ask, it's because of the selenium.
Okay. Yeah, so a Brazil nut a day. If you don't like a Brazil nut, frankly, there are some amazing thyroid supplements out there. My personal favorite right now is ThyroBoost Plus from New Ethics, because it also has some natural desiccated thyroid in it. It also has tyrosine, which helps conversion from T4 to T3. And it has some other effective ingredients. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but it's got like copper, selenium, iodine, tyrosine.
All the things you need to support
all the
thyroid function.
Support
so
thyroid
do you
function.
recommend taking supplements like that during prep to support it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And actually there's one too that I'm going to start switching to it, and it's from, I can't remember what it's called, but I'll see if I can find the name of it. But once I find the link for it, what I'll do is I'll share it with you, because I think I'm waiting on like my practitioner approval for that particular one, because you have to have like approval to be able to like have a link for it. Because it's just a natural desiccated thyroid supplement. And a lot of times just giving our body a little bit more can help. But to start with, that one from New Ethics is really effective. I love it.
It's like you said, it'll help. And I want to make sure that people are clear on that like taking these supplements, it's going to help support your thyroid. It's not going to be a cure-all. So I want people to understand that, because people look at supplements so many times as like, this is the answer that's going to fix it, and then I can compete forever. And it's like, no, you still need to, again, address things. Let's go back to cortisol. You know what I mean? Like, you still got to make sure you're managing all of the factors, but it's great to know that there are things to support it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I like to keep that in as sort of like a protective measure. And actually, I personally use it once. I take like 1 per day, because I'm no longer on thyroid medication with my Hashimoto's, because it's got the desiccated thyroid in it. And like, I check my labs pretty frequently, and it's just one of those things where it's like, it has a little bit extra of all the specifics that you need. I also like to make sure people are taking a vitamin D supplement and a high quality multivitamin. A high quality multivitamin and a fish oil and a vitamin D supplement, I think everybody needs. Like, those are the 3 that I recommend to, like, I think 9 out of 10 of my clients walking in through the door, because they're not going to hit those basic needs. And so the Thorne basic nutrients 2 a day is very well dosed. And it has also the necessary magnesium, zinc, and vitamin K2 to help a vitamin D absorb effectively. So if you're just taking vitamin D on its own, it's not going to do a whole lot. You have to have additional nutrients to help it absorb properly. And then I also like the Thorne vitamin D 5000 IU. If you're really deficient in vitamin D, you can take 2 of those a day.
Okay, cool.
Like, take 10,000 IU. You don't need to get a prescription for it. And then take a multivitamin along with that, like the Thorne 2 a day. And these are links that I can drop in for you.
For sure. And we'll give you, at the end of this episode, we'll definitely give all your contact information. So if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to you for sure. So
and that's,
go ahead.
And just as far as like just additional micronutrients too, and this is more of a this kind of goes alongside to sex hormones, but getting in more greens. And so I have a strategy that I learned from a coach that I worked with that I love for my people who do macro tracking. And this, if you're a coach and you're wanting to implement this with your clients, it takes kind of just a little bit to let this even out. But I usually recommend my clients who are macro tracking get like 400 to 500 grams of like raw vegetables, like green vegetables a day, but I track them as 0.
Okay. You don't track it to their macros?
I don't track it to their macros.
Okay.
I just want them to get the vegetables one way or the other. And if they're doing that consistently, it's like it flips a switch in people's brain. Like, we know that vegetables have carbs. Like, we know they're a carb. Like, they have a caloric value. But at this point, especially for prep and for somebody who's under this much stress, just getting the vegetables in outweighs the maybe like
the extra carbs,
extra carbs that it was. And if you do it consistently, it kind of becomes negligible in the grand scheme of
Yeah,
things.
for sure.
Right. So like
Exactly.
if you
Yeah.
start your prep doing it, by the time you get down to 1200 or 1300 calories at the end of your prep, because some people have to get that low. People
Yeah.
who say otherwise are liars.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, bless you. No, I love that. And I've heard a lot of different strategies. And that's one of about a million reasons why I always remind people not to compare macros too, because some people will be like, oh my God, her macros are so low. And it's like, well, you realize she's not tracking her vegetables. So she's actually eating more than what she's saying she is. You know what I mean? That's just one reason, but
Yeah. And then the volume of food too, that helps a lot with fullness. It helps a lot with
Mhm.
fiber. And again, that plays into also just like sex hormones and keeping the bowel healthy. But I would say the main reason why thyroid issues happen is because of chronic stress,
Yeah.
chronic stressors, calorie deficits, and nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah.
So if you can address those three, or at least address part of them, you can reduce the impact of that thyroid adaptation on the body during a prep.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And then so I kind of wanted to go into this too, because you talked about that I love that analogy about the fire. I'm literally still picturing it. And I think that also helps to explain why reverse dieting is so important. And it can actually, some people start reverse dieting and they're like, holy shit, I'm losing weight, even though I'm done with
Yeah.
prep. Or they'll maintain their stage weight for like 2 months after a show, even though they're eating almost twice as much. And I think that
Yeah.
that's a really good like analogy for
Yeah.
explaining why reverse dieting can be so beneficial, because it's,
It can
you
be.
know, your that fire has dwindled so much, and then it's like if you eat intentionally and bring food up, you can build that fire back up. But if you eat too much all at once, like
Right.
it's gonna have a
Like
negative
what
effect.
happens when you put too much fuel onto a fire?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it sometimes will actually like it suffocates because the like if you've ever done like a fire, we've done this before by accident where we like accidentally put out the fire because we put too much wood on top and
Yeah,
the oxygen wasn't able to like sufficiently reach, and so the fire just like burned out.
which is why this is such a cool analogy. Like I love that. It's like if
It's
you
like
are intentional and
yeah,
you increase your food, you can build that fire back up. But
yeah,
if you
and
just go on a binge and eat everything in sight, like you're just keeping those embers and then you're again suffocating them. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And even to then that comes into the conversation with a reverse diet of like why people sometimes end up either losing a little bit of fat or they just look more full, right? In their muscle bellies and stuff like that, when and they don't maybe gain a ton of weight or they at least maintain weight for 2, 3 months after their prep before they start seeing the scale to go up. With a reverse diet, I would say it's probably normal to expect at the end of your reverse diet to have anywhere, depending on how extreme your diet was and how much weight you lost, to have a minimum of 5 to 7 pounds regained
Mm-hmm.
for a lifestyle.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
a competitor, it might be closer to like 10 to 15 pounds.
Yeah. Which
Like
all depends on,
depends on a
their
lot of
height,
things.
their body composition,
Yeah.
how extreme the diet was, all those things. There's definitely variables, but I think that's, and
Yeah.
and I always tell people that like they're afraid to gain weight with a reverse diet. And I'm like, you don't understand, like it's where we want that sometimes.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's
it's where you want
beneficial.
it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
because too, when we get back that reverse diet up, right, that thermic effect of food, it kind of helps keep things burning as we feed up and your metabolism wants that fuel. But that weight regain doesn't usually show up in the form of like a size bigger pant.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It gets
100%.
stored in like fluid retention and water retention, water and
Your
glucose getting
muscles are fuller.
your muscles
Like,
are fuller, and you just have more food in your tummy, like
yeah.
on a daily basis. And I would also argue that you want almost to gain that extra weight because that's your buffer for living life.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's an extra, that's a glass of wine on a date night. That's a random pizza night or a Taco
Yeah.
Tuesday or an
It's how you
extra
can maintain that balance and
take
yeah.
that extra anywhere from 7 to 12 pounds post reverse diet, depending on how extreme the diet was and who you are as a person. That's where your maintenance is.
Yeah.
Your lowest weight is not likely where you're going to stay for lifestyle, or definitely not for competitors.
Yeah.
But that little window of like sort of middle ground, likely for most people, is where life is going to be
Yeah.
happening.
Your
And I would
lowest weight is
say
not your best life,
your
for
lowest
sure.
weight is not your best life. Like I have some clients too, like where we got them down to like a certain weight. And I've got one, like, for example, I've got a client, but she's only like 5'3" and like She's a little thing. And she usually, after we get her through like a deficit phase, we bring her calories back up to 300 calories. And again, she's only 5'3", so like she maxes out at like 1,800 calories a day just for personal preference, because she's a little thing.
Yeah.
And she gains like, I think like 4 pounds.
Yeah.
Like, and then she just kind of hangs out there, and then we like drop again, and it's always like a 3 to 4 pound after we bring her calories back up. But that's pretty consistent for her. But again, she's littler, so that again, she's more on the lower end of what you could expect for weight regain, but she's also a lifestyle, not a competitor, so her
Yeah,
weight
exactly. It's not as extreme. So oh yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, because again, like this is all so good, but we are already getting to being like a longer episode, and I still want to address sex hormones a little bit, which I think we've kind of touched on them a lot. But there's some of the things I definitely want to talk about is the two main points that I want to talk about, and then if there's other things you want to go into, of course we will. But I definitely want to address the concept of amenorrhea and why that can be, a negative thing, because so many people think, oh, cool, I don't have my period, great, I don't have to deal with it, that's awesome. And then I also want to talk about sex hormones and how they can really affect your progress in the gym, especially when it comes to building muscle. So
yeah, it's a great time. Sex hormones are so much fun. It sucks because they're the one thing that, to be quite honest, so thyroid is usually, for a timeline perspective, pretty easy to address, can kind of be fixed within like a month or two, given the right circumstances and good adherence to a game plan. Cortisol can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months to recover after it's been flatlined, sometimes longer. I would say for my adherent clients, it takes about 4 months to start to see the curve change, and a solid like 6 to 8 months for it to be back to fully normal. And to see the weight come off in that time after the first 4 months. That's when fat loss will kind of start to happen once things start to regulate. Sex hormones are difficult, especially for females, because of two things. One, we have a 28-day cycle in which things have to be assessed. We can't assess things from week to week. We have to assess things from cycle to cycle.
Yeah.
Two, if you're on hormonal birth control, there's only so much you're going to be able to bring up those levels. That's, I feel like, another conversation for another day, birth control and its impact and how it can impact progress. But like, let's just say you're dealing with low testosterone, low estrogen, and low progesterone because you're just getting out of a prep of some kind. It can take usually a minimum of 4 months to start to get your progesterone back up to an acceptable level where you would have an ovulatory cycle again. So the reason why people lose their period is because they're not producing adequate progesterone. This is, again, a generalization. An adequate progesterone and a simplification. But at the end of the day, you need progesterone to trigger ovulation. If you are not ovulating, you don't produce progesterone, right? Or the body adapts. It says, you can't support a child, we're not going to ovulate. Progesterone primarily gets made through the release of an egg. The corpus luteum is the body's primary source of progesterone. So when you're not ovulating, or you don't have enough progesterone to ovulate, you don't get more unless you do HRT.
Okay. Oh God, which that's a whole,
nother
God, this is why I'm like, I want to pick your brain. Like I might have to have you back on because there's so many other things I want to talk to you about.
So that's why it's like, and when we talk about progesterone, okay, that's when we start to deal with estrogen dominance due to low progesterone, that relative estrogen dominance. So even though your estrogen is maybe low, your progesterone is also so low that it's technically estrogen dominance. And that causes that, and then the low testosterone, you're not going to put on as much lean muscle tissue from your workouts. You're going to have a harder time losing fat, especially in the midsection. And you're not going to recover as effectively. Like, it can affect a lot of different things. I don't know, and you could probably share anecdotally, but did you see a shift in your ability to train, recover, and put on muscle tissue after you came off birth control?
1,000%. So there was multiple variables when I went off birth control. Like I wanted to go off of it for a long time, and because of like, personal experience, like personal things going on in my life, I wasn't able to. But then once I went off of it, like that so many aspects of my life were improved, and progress in the gym was 1000% one of those,
Yeah,
which it is hard to say because I also, it was around that same time that I started taking creatine, and like there was other variables. So it's like, I can't give
right.
this definite, yes, it's because of birth control, but
It was
absolutely. Like
likely a
if you look at my pictures from while I was on birth control to after going off, it's not only is there obviously muscle gain, which, just over time is going to happen, but like you can just see almost in like where, maybe even like where I'm holding water, like things like that. Like I just look different. I look
yeah,
better, which
yeah,
that's me personally. I know some people don't have as much negative side effects from birth control, but
yeah.
for me, it was, oh my God, I wish I went off it. So I was on it for 17 years too, though.
Yeah. And I will say too, it's not just because of birth control, but it was because you were able to get more progesterone into your body. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? After coming off of a cycle, having a natural cycle,
Yeah.
having actual ovulation triggered, that ovulation, that egg, that corpus luteum helps your body produce more progesterone, right? That's what helps bring it up. And that's what helps reduce that gap with the estrogen dominance. And that's when you start to see those improvements. So was it maybe
Which,
the only reason? No,
yeah.
but was it a factor? Probably,
I
yeah.
feel like that's such a good like explanation too of why it's like, okay, so competitors, so many competitors do lose their period during prep. And it's like, that's one of many reasons why you can't have longevity in the sport and stay in prep. Because if you aren't having your period, you are literally slowing your progress. If you're getting feedback
Yeah.
that you need to build muscle and you're not having a period, you're only hurting yourself.
And in the long term, it's going to be really damaging for women's health when it comes to bone
Mhm.
density. Sex hormones are cardioprotective, neuroprotective. Like, we're not just talking about your longevity in the
Yeah.
sport. We're talking about the fact, are you going to have all your marbles when you're
Mhm.
65 years old?
Yeah. Or do you want to conceive children in the future?
You want to have
There's a
kids?
lot of,
Oh
yeah.
God. I don't even want to talk about
Yeah.
repairing the between the
I'm
ovaries and
like,
the brain.
we don't need to
That's
go there,
like,
but it's like those are things too that it's like, so many women are like, well, I'm not trying to have kids, so it's fine. And it's like, well, you have to understand there's long-term effects to all of
yeah.
these.
And even like the cardio protective effects of having a regular menstrual cycle, I did a whole podcast episode on why your cycle matters regardless of conception. Like, if
Hmm.
your goal is to never have children, go for it. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that your fertility health doesn't impact you from a body composition and long-term health perspective. And so many competitors, I feel like, especially young competitors, and I mean, I was the same way, and I'm sure you were at one point too, they're maybe in their early 20s or mid 20s, and all they see is the pretty suit, the pretty outfits, the hair, the trophy, the glamour, the grind, and they love it all,
The
but
recognition.
so short-sighted on what
Yeah.
this means for them in their 30s, their 40s, and their 50s. And I will say there are a lot of high-level competitors that are on birth control, but I guess
Yeah.
what? I bet you a lot of those high-level competitors are also doing HRT injections to help fill the gaps
Yeah.
in their hormonal profile. They're not disclosing that.
There's always a lot going behind the scenes that you don't know
Disclosing that. So you
100%.
can't be like, well, so and so does it on hormonal birth control and they're just fine. One, they're either on something or they're a genetic outlier.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that HRT is bad, but you
Yeah.
can't hold yourself to somebody else who's maybe has the access and the resources to a coach who works with the compounded pharmacy, who has the ability to access these in a safe manner for their high level clients.
Yeah. You can't compare. You
You
just can't
can't
compare.
compare.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
So you have to assume that you're not the exception
Hmm.
in everything.
Yeah.
You have to assume that you're not the exception to the rule because you likely are not. There are very few people who are.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. So this is all great. So there's a couple of questions that I wanted to kind of, wrap things up with. Two of them
yeah.
kind of go together. So, well, actually, hold on. Before I get into these, we talked about a lot of the supplements for thyroid. Do you have any other supplements or macros or micros or anything that you can do to support sex hormones and cortisol too?
So sex hormones, yes. So getting in fish oil, omegas, EPAs,
Mm,
DHAs,
okay.
flaxseed, hemp hearts, things like that is going to be really beneficial. And again, those greens, that's
Mhm.
going to be really beneficial. I love to introduce wild caught fish a few days a week also. And that's always a really good option if that's something you have access to. Cortisol, it depends. It's
Hmm.
not one of those things where I would recommend just generally, because depending on where you are at in your adaptations, it does require testing to determine what the best course of
Okay.
action is for either adaptogens or adrenal support, like an adrenal glandular support.
Yeah.
Doing one or the other, depending on where you're at in the adaptations, can make things worse.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, okay, maybe not to give like a blanket statement, but as in my experience, what I've noticed, a lot of people that have high cortisol, usually reducing caffeine can be beneficial though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely reducing caffeine or managing caffeine. And if you do need like a drink hit, like in the afternoon, get a decaf. Like get a
Yeah.
decaf Americano or get like matcha or something like that. I love matcha in the afternoon. That's like my afternoon pick me up.
Yeah.
And don't drink caffeine, please, within an hour of waking. And
Mm.
please eat something before you have your first cup of coffee. I beg of you, of anything that you take away from this podcast, do not be the girl that like hits her caffeine first thing in the morning. And if you're training in the evening and you need like a pick me up, get some like beta alanine or some shit.
Can
Like, don't do a pre workout.
can you explain why caffeine first thing in the morning and caffeine on an empty stomach? Can you explain why you advocate that
So
not to
it
do that?
has it has to do with your cortisol awakening response, and it can impact your body's effectiveness for managing your cortisol as the day goes on. So if you do caffeine first thing in the morning, right on top of when your cortisol is spiking, okay, because it spikes and then it
Hmm.
starts to come down. But if you dump caffeine onto that morning spike, it's going to prolong that, like that curve regulating to where it needs to regulate. And
Okay.
that's why we
Interesting.
don't want to do it first
And
thing in the
same
morning.
thing with having like on an empty stomach, same reason, because food brings
That's
down
more for
cortisol levels,
that's
right?
more for digestion,
Oh, okay.
just to
Okay.
reduce like stomach acid and like
Makes sense.
indigestion and bloating.
Got
Yeah,
it. Got it. Okay,
caffeine
cool.
is very acidic, and if you're introducing like
Yeah.
caffeine on an empty stomach with nothing in your tummy, you're gonna get like bubble guts, like, or
Got
you'll
it.
get burn, or you'll get a headache. Like,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
not a good situation. So just like from a like our stomach has like acid and enzymes in it already. And
Hmm.
again, if you're just like dumping caffeine like into your gut first thing in the morning without anything in it, you're probably going to be pretty uncomfortable.
Hmm. Yeah. No, makes
It's
sense.
not good for
A lot of
digestion.
people say they're like, oh, I can't have coffee because it upsets my stomach. Maybe they're just not having it with food. So makes sense. Okay.
Maybe they're not
Okay.
having
So
it
now
with
let me get into, like I said, I had those two questions that they kind of go hand in hand. So
food.
the
Yeah.
first one is at what point when you're starting to notice these things like your cortisol, thyroid, sex hormones are getting out at OAC, at what point should you tell your coach out of concern? And also how to know when you maybe need to pull back and potentially even come out of prep for the sake of your health and maintaining longevity in the sport.
Yep. So the first question I'm actually going to flip on its head.
Okay.
I believe it's on the onus of the coach to provide the opportunity for the client to bring these things to the table. And I actually, again, just talked about this on my podcast about there are things that our clients don't tell us.
Yeah.
And it's not because they don't they're not trying to keep things from us. They just don't know how to answer those questions. So making sure if you are coaching somebody that you're asking regularly about their digestion, about their sleep quality, their sleep quantity, that you're following through on their digestion, their bowel movements, if they've had a hard to pass stool, excess diarrhea, bloating after meals, and how their PMS symptoms are, if they were on their cycle, and if they were on their cycle, what symptoms they had and to what severity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to notice like a lot of these things flag it, and you can ask this in a weekly form. I have a daily
Yeah.
biofeedback format. I think I've got about a third of my clients are on a daily biofeedback format at any given time. And
Yeah.
this is really beneficial for a competitor too. And to do a daily biofeedback form. Like if you're in prep, you do a daily biofeedback
Yeah,
form.
I have all of my competitors and even some of my lifestyle. I have them tracking their sleep, their digestion, their stress on a daily
Exactly.
basis as well.
Exactly.
But I just know that there's a lot of coaches who don't track that stuff. And so
Exactly.
that's why
And
it
if
does
you
come down to the coach. But if you have a coach that you're working with and they aren't tracking this stuff, at what point are you like, I need to say something?
Yeah, I would just say, hey, I know that there might be some potential downregulation in my digestion and my adrenals and my thyroid. I would like to start tracking these things daily. If they say no, it doesn't matter, go find a new coach.
Yeah.
If they're like, yeah, let's start tracking it, you can do it as simple as a Google form. And if you're just in general worried about this stuff, just make like a daily diary entry of how these things are going and just track it yourself. Because really, if any of these things are happening with any regularity, you need to say something. Like if you have PMS so bad that you like snap at everybody or you're so anxious that you can't eat, that's a problem. If you're not having a daily bowel movement, that's a problem. Like, period. And at one point you should pull out for your physical health. I would say if you're unable to fall asleep or you're not sleeping through the night consistently, pull out. If you're waking up and you're so groggy and you're needing a nap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you need to pull out. Or get blood work done to see if there's anything major going on or if it's just an acute adaptation. And so that's kind of hard to say. And I'm very much of the camp of I like to test instead of guess when it comes to hormone adaptations. I can tell just by talking with somebody and make an educated guess of what they're likely dealing with. But in order to address it specifically, I really want to see somebody's lab work, especially when it comes to adrenals. Like I want to see what the big picture looks like and how the systems can be impacting each other. And so that's kind of what I would say. So if your coach isn't already logging these things biofeedback wise daily, you either ask for it. If they say it doesn't matter, you run and you find a new coach who gives a shit. If you don't have a coach and you're listening to this, you need to start tracking these things. You can make a Google form and just set a reminder in your calendar daily to fill it out too. Like it's as simple as that. And then if you're not sleeping through the night, if you're not recovering, if you're having a hard time falling asleep, like if you're consistently getting less than like 6.5 hours of sleep a night, that's a problem. You should not be competing.
Yeah.
Like,
so in talking about that, like a lot of people would say like, maybe you just need more rest and refeeds and stuff though. Do you think that could potentially in some cases be enough to address it? Or do you think it is usually like, okay.
It could be. But if it continues, like if it's a persistent issue and the interventions don't fix it, then you need to pull out, get some lab work and fix what's going on under the hood. So that's a good, thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I was some people, they might have like a week of shitty sleep and it could be, that they were on their period while they got in a fight with their boyfriend and had stress at work. And then it's like, okay, let's take some rest, give you some food. And then the next week they're fine again.
Yeah. I would say if these things persist past week 3,
okay,
we might have a bigger problem. And then it might be time to maybe pull some labs and see what's going on. If there's anything bigger going on, or do we need to change the timeline? Maybe it's not pulling out a prep entirely. Maybe it's just changing the timeline.
100%.
And I'm pulling calories up for maybe 4 to 6 weeks to give the body a break. And then going back into the deficit, but just picking a date farther out for your show.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I don't think going into prep anyway with a date in mind. I think you prep and then you gauge your end date based on how your prep is going.
I agree. I unfortunately, there's so many people, they like need that date to shoot for to stay on track, because if they don't, they won't. So like, I like to give now, and I didn't used to do this, but I like to now give my clients like a time frame, and I'll be like, look, there's these like 2 or 3 shows. Let's aim for one of these. Yeah. And I like doing that so that they can plan, because people also need to like take off of work and, do these things. And it's like, it is hard, but then it does get more challenging when you're looking at like national shows, because there's only 5 or 6 a year. So it's like, if you can't do this one, then you have to push back to the one that's a month later and it's on the other side of the country. So it's like, it's as great as it is to just plan, like compete, like do your prep and compete when your body is ready. Like sometimes we do need to like actually look at the show dates.
So maybe the caveat is, as much as possible, work with your body to as much as you possibly can, given the, logistical barriers potentially with picking a show and actually doing it. But I like having like an idea of when you would compete. But I think that then the flip side of the coin is like, if we don't get on stage by this date, then we need to go into like an off season, go into a reverse and an off season of like, we can only push so far for so long. Like, I feel like once you hit that like 9-month mark, like I feel like that's the end date for a lot of people. Like that's like the max.
No, because your body, you just can't take it anymore. I've had that. I think that's been my longest. I think mine was like 8 months. And by the end, I'm just not just physically, but mentally. Like, I'm done. I'm done. And then that's when you risk that like rebound too, where it's like you need to navigate that reverse like so carefully too. So,
Yep.
okay,
And I
cool.
think that the other thing too that we're seeing, and I think that people have to also recognize this, and this is sort of a tangent again, and then I'll let you kind of wrap it up. But there's a lot of competitors, I mentioned earlier, like a lot of high level competitors that are likely on some kind of hormone replacement therapy to help fill the gap while they are doing their seasons. There is also a lot of fitness professionals and high level competitors that are also leveraging like peptides like semaglutide, which is actually a really great peptide. I love it. I have some clients on it, and I'm actually using it myself currently. And it's a really great tool for certain scenarios, but it's also a really great tool in the toolbox for competitors who can access it and use it safely. And there's a lot of people using it that are not disclosing that they're using it.
Oh
And
yeah.
they use it to help reduce the amount of strain on their body for a prolonged deficit. And so they seemingly now can do all of a sudden much longer seasons than they could otherwise do.
Yeah, 100%. Well,
And
and I
I
think that goes
always have
for
to keep
like
that in mind.
when it comes to things like semaglutide, which is things like Ozempic, Wegovy, those types of things for anybody
Yeah.
who's not aware, like the thing to remember that too is like that is, technically a performance enhancing drug. And that's one of those things that like people aren't disclosing that information. So when I have, natural athletes, whether they're clients or friends, and they're looking at these people who are like, well, she's doing show after show. Well, she's training 6 days per week. Well, she's doing this. And I'm like, yeah, she has assistance.
Yeah.
She's on a PED. She's just not telling you that. You know what I mean? So it's like, again, it's that you can't fucking compare. There's always shit going on that you don't know about. Not
Correct.
always. I shouldn't generalize. There's sometimes there are those genetic outliers, but
There
a lot
are.
of times there's
There are.
other shit going
And
on.
and those genetic outliers do very well in their arena
Yeah.
because they're a genetic outlier.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? But like a lot of people are not genetic outliers. A lot of people are not exceptions to the rule. And there's so many things out there. So if you are a competitor and you're like listening to us and you're going, well, that so and so does XYZ, so and so does XYZ. Again, you can't compare because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And there's likely a lot that you don't know about what goes on in their day-to-day life or what they do to support themselves or
Mm-hmm.
what they use to help fill in the gaps. And just assume that you are not the exception to the rule. And you will
100%.
be much better off in the long term for
Yes.
longevity in the sport.
Yes. Yes.
We're not the exception.
Good. I love this. I think that was a good like tying it all together. I think we covered so much amazing stuff. Again, I could still pick your brain about like
And there's so
I
many
could talk
things.
to you for hours and hours, but I think we're already at over an hour. So the last thing I want to do is, Elena, please let everybody know where they can find you, follow you, if they just want to follow you, for information, if
Yeah.
they have any questions, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, at elena.m.fit, and my first name is spelled Elena. And I also have a podcast called What the Funk, where I talk about more in depth some of these more specific topics. So like it's for coaches and just general population for like what things your clients are telling you, how to mitigate pregnancy if you are not using hormonal birth control, how to navigate the post-birth control journey, what is PCOS, how to manage insulin resistance, different things like that, that I like to talk about on my podcast that are very specific like topics, but they resonate with a lot of people that are struggling with it because a lot of the people that are my audience are dealing with a lot of these issues due to years of chronic dieting. And it's triggered just a lot of shit within their body now, and they can't get around it.
Which a lot of
And
that is
so,
competing, chronic dieting.
unfortunately, sometimes it's former competitors or former
Yeah.
athletes that end up on my
Yep.
roster. And I'm like, I know what happened here. You did
Yeah.
not have amazing guidance in this initial journey. So let's get you fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's another story. So that podcast is called What the Funk. And then my website is dumpyourdiet.com, and that's where I'm at. So those are the three
Cool,
best places
cool.
to find me.
Well, yeah, definitely give Elena a follow. Like I said, she's a wealth of knowledge. We really just barely scratched the surface today with everything. We could go into so much more detail. But thank you all for listening, and thank you, Elena, for coming on today.
Yeah, it was a great time. You guys have a wonderful day. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for listening to Treadmill Talks. If this episode taught you something, lit a fire under your ass, or at least helped you forget how long you've been walking in place, please leave a review or take a screenshot to share on your social media. Don't forget to tag me at Shannon Maves so I can give you some love right back. And thanks again for listening to my Treadmill Talk.